I don't care who you are, that theme is friggin' awesome. Halo is the reason there was ever serious competition to Nintendo and Sony in the video game space this millennium. Originally conceived of as a release for the Mac and PC, Halo evolved into being a launch title for the original Xbox. It was so successful that not only was it a bona fide system seller, but it was heralded as an evolution in the first-person shooter genre, and is still the first Xbox exclusive franchise most people would think of almost 25 years later. At the time, I was still playing an N64 and would soon grab a GameCube, but even I couldn't escape this game's success, and I can recall many late-night play sessions where this game replaced GoldenEye and Smash Bros. As the game of choice. It became an instant classic, and naturally, many sequels followed, and an expansive universe was created to support multimedia projects, including books, comics, and various films and TV shows. Halo's impact cannot be overstated when talking about video gaming in the 2000s, and for a lot of people, this remains a definitive first-person shooter. My relation to the franchise is somewhat different to most people's, in that I was never a diehard fan of the series. At best, I'm a casual fan, and only really play through the Master Chief Collection once every couple of years. It's not that I don't appreciate the series and don't have fond memories of it, I was just never hooked in the same way that a lot of other people were. I'm sure part of that was that I rarely played online multiplayer when the series was at its peak. Also, there were a plethora of other games I had a stronger attachment to, so beyond local co-op and multiplayer, Halo was seldom my go-to game in my free time. Yet, I can still recognize quality when I see it, and the Halo series has a lot of quality titles and fun to be had. This ranking will be primarily how I feel about the single-player campaigns, as that's where I spend most of my time playing. But I can't act as if the iconic multiplayer doesn't factor into my fondness for certain games. I can only promise that it won't be as big of a factor in my individual assessment, as it would not be fair to give a game the edge over another because I've actually had a chance to play its multiplayer. To give you an idea, after 2009, I never had a consistent person to play multiplayer with, so every multiplayer after ODST won't be considered in my personal evaluation. Also, I won't be counting the Halo Wars games and the other spin-offs due to my lack of exposure to them. This will cover just the 8 mainline shooters, from Halo Combat Evolved to Halo Infinite. Alright, let's get started. There are quite a few reasons why Halo 5 is the perpetual choice for the worst game in the series. Obviously, there was the fact that the game was heavily marketed on a concept that isn't really the core of the story, but the problems go beyond that. Master Chief gets sidelined in favor of another team, which is a concept I'm fine with and has been successfully done in this series several times already, but the replacement team is incredibly dull and lifeless. The only one I care about is Buck, and that's only because he's a recognizable returning character. Chief's story about going AWOL is contrived to give Spartan Locke a reason to go after him, and the reveal of Cortana being alive and deciding to enforce her will upon the galaxy makes the emotional core of the previous game seem irrelevant, as well as feeling like a slap in the face to longtime fans. Cortana essentially dies, gets merged with some Forerunner database, and then comes back not only permanently cured of rampancy, but also with this grand vision that seems horrific. It's a hasty development for an antagonist, and the whole thing reeks of a twist for the sake of being a twist, placing perhaps the most likable character in the series into a position that expects us to be automatically heartbroken and invested. I'm not, because I can see the marketing machinations behind this story. It's an artificial development that doesn't feel like it's coming from the characters, it's there to shock fans and incite interest for the disenfranchised. Not that Halo has been the shining beacon of how to do well-defined characters to begin with, but that makes it all the worse when you do something like this to one of the few exceptions to that fact, and it seems to tear them down and distance us from them. Beyond all of that, I also feel like this is a story that's speedrunning from one plot point to the next. It's relying too much on your knowledge of Halo lore to fill in the missing character development for the playable teams, and it's using people like the Arbiter, Halsey, Lasky, and Palmer as blatant fan service rather than as real contributions to the story. All that said, there are some things I like. Despite the plot, I weirdly think this is one of the more fun campaigns to play through. I love some of the improvements to the gunplay, like the Promethean's homing capabilities, and I appreciate having to rely on a bit of strategy to take down the bad guys, such as paying attention to what kind of weapon you have against which type of enemy, and the knights only having certain vulnerable spots. Halo 5 is a mess of a game. The improvements in gameplay don't begin to make up for the frustrating story that feels almost inaccessible to casual fans like myself, some lifeless protagonists that are virtually indistinguishable from each other, and a villainous scheme that is muddled and perpetuated by somebody that has no business being the antagonist. Thus, Guardians is cemented as my least favorite in the series, and it's no wonder why people's trust in 343 soured upon its release. .343 had a lot riding on Halo Infinite. None of their past releases was without major criticism on either the multiplayer or campaign side of things, and the promising start from Halo 4 was seeming to be wasted. Infinite decides to move past the war with the created, place the action in an open world context, and essentially soft reboot the series, putting you back in the boots of a lone Spartan with an AI and a Pelican for transport. I'm not a big fan of some of these choices, but there's still a lot to like about Infinite. The grapple is the single best gameplay tweak to the series since dual wielding. I like making the scope a little smaller and relying more on a character journey. The art design is the best in the series, and I really like the voice acting here. And the new characters of the pilot and the weapon help to smooth things over. I know not everybody likes the weapon, but I found her to be charming and funny without being overly simplistic and annoying, and I'm sure that's in part to Jen Taylor's fantastic vocal performance. Overall, the whole game seems to be the closest in spirit to the original concepts for the series since Halo 3. However, going open world and non-linear means you sacrifice story structure and pacing, which is a problem when you're still banking on the go here to flip the switch or learn a bit of backstory as your gameplay motivation. I still do not understand the relationship between the Covenant and the Banished. The two lead villains are almost as bland as the Didact was from 4, and while I like the meta commentary from 343 about how they've handled the series, I'm still frustrated about some of the story choices from 5 and how Infinite chooses to tie up some of those lingering points. For example, it's really odd to have had so much build up to a war between AIs and humanity and then not allow us to live with that status quo. Cortana's final death and subsequent resurrection in the weapon doesn't have a fraction of the power her original death in 4 had. And ultimately, this story feels superfluous in the grand scheme of the Halo universe, repeating a lot of the same emotional beats from the last 2 games without really bringing something new to the table. Master Chief feels like he's failed humanity, he mourns Cortana, he pushes his feelings to the side to get the job done, etc. I get why 343 decided to drop the Rogue Cortana storyline. I mean, I can't see how you could have salvaged it enough to win back over longtime fans, but going from 5 to Infinite feels like whiplash if you're expecting it to build off from Guardian's story. Halo Infinite really isn't a bad game. It's quite a step up from 5 and shows that the series still has some life left to it, but I'm still not entirely sure what 343 want to do with the series in order to keep it going. The next Halo thankfully has a better starting point than this one had, but it's likely still going to be a long road to travel for Halo in order to completely return to the pinnacle for Microsoft that it once was. Everyone has unpopular opinions, right? I have 2 with this series, and here's the first. I have a hard time going back to Halo 1. First, I don't think the mystery of what Halo is or the characters themselves are all that captivating, at least not enough to support multiple playthroughs. Because this was a time when gaming was just starting to figure out that stories and characters could be a selling point, those elements here are rather simple and aren't worth revisiting much, especially in comparison with its sequels. That would be fine if the gameplay and level design were strong enough to keep me going, which leads to my second issue. While the gameplay remarkably holds up to this day, the level design has not. There are so many copy-pasted sections that feel like they pad out the experience. The Truth and Reconciliation and library levels are particularly guilty of this. And I swear, it takes me at least 30 minutes to beat most of the levels. If that's not enough, this game is a little bit palindromic, meaning that you start running back through earlier level designs as you near the end. It's nice that the context, enemy placement, and some of the art design has shifted, but I often feel so much deja vu that impedes me from enjoying this experience of backtracking through earlier stages. Finally, and this is a problem I share with other series like Mass Effect and Assassin's Creed, the gameplay advances of the later entries are so enjoyable that I have a hard time going back to something more simplified. I miss the hijacking of vehicles, the differences in movement speed and jumping, the expanded weapon roster, and how replayable the levels are in the later installments. All that being said, Halo Combat Evolved still gets a lot of things remarkably right. The core gameplay loop, the sense of isolation and atmosphere, the art design, the driving sections, the music, the multiplayer, it's all great stuff. Going from Perfect Dark, released just the year before, to this feels like a huge leap forward in technology. Worlds never felt as big in gaming as they did here. The variety of different environments is impressive, and the control scheme is inspired. If anything, the problems I stated are only magnified in my eyes because the rest of the game holds up really well even today. The original Halo is the reason Microsoft got a foothold in the console space, and thus it should be remembered both as one of the most important launch titles and as a leap forward in console-based first-person shooters. It's just that the cobwebs are getting in the way of my appreciation of the art. An expansion pack that turned out to be so much more. I find a lot appealing about ODST. The switch from a faceless and mostly characterless protagonist to a team of soldiers is welcome. The sense of vulnerability both in nerfing the player capabilities and level design is a great move to distinguish this from past Halo titles. The production changes from lighting to color palette do a lot to give this one its own feel, and setting it away from the Spartan action of the numbered entries helps to enrich this universe, making it stand out from the many other sci-fi shooter properties. The story of the rookie finding his squad mates and discovering why the Covenant were interested in Earth at all creates a unique atmosphere and tone within Halo, and I enjoyed the squad mates. Part of that is that several of these voice actors are from notable sci-fi shows that I like, but also these guys do a great job in making each soldier feel like an individual personality. Character development has never been Halo's strong suit, so a little goes a long way. That said, I feel like this was the beginning of Halo's overarching problem of glossing over details that seem vital to understanding its story. I still have no idea how the Covenant knew about the Forerunner artifact on Earth, why the Superintendent would know something about that artifact, or why Dare would keep her mission details from the rest of the squad. And the new weapons feel overly ineffectual against the larger Covenant forces, to the point where I almost always get rid of my default starting loadout in order to stand a chance in a firefight. Also, I get that this was based on Halo 3, where the Elite were the allies of the UNSC and thus not programmed into the game as adversaries, but given that ODST takes place during Halo 2, it feels weird not to have the Elites running around and instead have the Brutes out in full force. Still, this is a fun game to play. I adore the soundtrack. The addition of Firefight to the multiplayer options was a genius move, and it still retains what makes Halo a good time while still feeling like its own thing. For a smaller story, ODST leaves a bigger impact than it should have. The hype surrounding Halo 3 was insane. Even someone such as I, largely isolated from stable internet at the time, couldn't escape its reach. When the game came out, people were happy to finish the fight and then spend months of their lives in the multiplayer. I too spent a lot of time in that multiplayer, though it was relegated to offline, and even I got swept up in how fun it was. However, this is primarily a ranking of the campaigns, and while Halo 3 is still a classic in this respect, it doesn't quite match up to some of the others. I do think this is generally one of the best overall in terms of level design, pacing, and gameplay, with the big exception of the Cortana level towards the end, which rivals the library from the original as my least favorite level in all of Halo. The emotions still run high as you return to Earth, take a tank through sandy canyons looking for the Ark's control room, and press the pedal to the metal during the finale's excellent Warthog section. There are a few reasons I put this one lower. I find the structure and length to be a bit upsetting. By the time you make it through the first act, you've played through half the missions, thus making this feel like the shortest of the campaigns. I've beaten this in a single day many times without having the entire day taken up by it. I also think there are some less than smooth transitions throughout the story. For example, I may have missed something between Halo 2 and Halo 3, but I still don't know why the Covenant knew to go to Earth to find the portal, or even where on Earth it was. I get not sending the entire human fleet to the Ark, but why does Lord Hood seem so resistant to send anyone after Truth in favor of staying on Earth? I thought the Elite fleet destroyed the Flood infestation, and I didn't see any remaining Covenant fleet on Earth, so why does Lord Hood sound so defeated? What immediate threat are they defending Earth against? Plus, I never understood if killing the Gravemind by activating the ring destroyed all Flood everywhere, or just this subsection, as I don't recall any Flood on the additional rings we visit in the later games. But putting those gripes aside, Halo 3's campaign is one of the most replayable in the series and contains some truly spectacular moments, such as the human fleet's bombardments of the Covenant dig site, defeating the 2 scarabs on your way to stop Truth, and racing towards Forward Unto Dawn at the end. Halo 3 is a really great game overall, and mostly deserves its reputation. Halo Reach has a lot of similarities to Rogue One. It's a direct prequel to the original story, most everyone dies by the end, and it even features a person delivering a piece of mission-critical intel to a ship taking off that features in the opening shot of the original piece. Personally, I think Halo Reach is the better of the 2 projects. I love the sense of impending doom mixed with the righteous and ill-fated duty. You know you will not survive, but you are compelled to defend the planet so that others may see tomorrow. You encounter heavy losses throughout, and the final mission is a fantastic example of story mixed with gameplay. You hold out as long as you can against the invading Covenant, but it is inevitable you will fall to their might, which does well to remind fans that the Covenant are more than cannon fodder and are indeed a threat to be taken seriously. Beyond that, the game is a culmination of all that Bungie did well with the series. A tighter story that does just enough character development without making it drenched with nothing but cutscenes, inventive action set pieces such as a space battle or an aerial dogfight with new vehicles, and a fantastic atmosphere. Halo Reach may seem like the most unnecessary of the games from a story's perspective, but it would be a mistake not to join Noble Team in defending Reach, as the journey itself has a lot of wonderful moments and great levels, though it does have its lesser qualities. Some of the story relies a little too much on your knowledge of past Halo lore, which alienates newcomers. I'd have had no idea who Dr. Halsey was if I hadn't played Halo 4 before this. It does have a few unintentionally funny moments, such as Kat's death, and it is a little too coincidental to me that Noble Six's first assignment with the team just also happens to be the start of the fall of Reach. Despite my minor gripes, Halo Reach is a compelling entry and one of the best. Bungie certainly left the series on a high note. Here's that second unpopular opinion. I really like Halo 4, and it's my personal second favorite story in the Master Chief entries. I never played the multiplayer, so I can't speak to those problems. I'm not big on Halo lore, so I'm sure I missed the continuity errors that many bemoan. I can understand the gripes about the art style, though I'm fine with shifting art styles within a series, even if I think they went overboard with the Chief's armor. And humanizing a mostly mute tank like John after 3 games is always going to be an iffy thing. But I really dig the angle they took here. The personal conflict at first seems to be about saving Cortana, but then it turns into something more ponderous. Master Chief, despite being fully devoted to humanity's protection, never seems to open up or relate to them beyond the individual mission parameters. So the only way we were ever going to get inside his head is through Cortana, and losing that link to his humanity might be the most terrifying thing John has yet encountered. In the end, is he more machine than man? Is this the next better evolutionary step for humanity, or was this all the result of the hubris of a scientist playing God? I love all of this, and think these are the best performances from Jen Taylor and Steve Downes out of the entire series. The levels do run a bit long, but unlike the original Halo, they don't feel so copy-pasted in their designs and enemy encounters that I ever get bored, though I could do without the need to flip every switch multiple times. I also think the Didact as a villain is quite weak, at least as presented within the game, and I still have no idea why the Covenant is here beyond the need for familiar foes to make this feel like a Halo game. Notwithstanding, I love the fast-paced franticness to the fighting and how the game keeps in mind the sandbox element to Halo's combat that is so crucial to the series' identity. The story wraps up in a fine emotional place, and I wouldn't have minded if this was the last time we saw the Chief. And these are some of my favorite vehicle sections, with the Mantis and the flying bits being real highlights. Halo 4 was a calculated risk from 343, and as far as I'm concerned, they did a pretty swell job with their first full foray. I think I can understand where some fans are coming from in their dislike of this game, but much like I had with Force Awakens and No Time to Die, I just don't share in that same negativity at all. Halo 2 is where everything came together for me with the series. It still retains all the cool things from the original, but adds a better weapon roster, more opportunities for vehicles, a better soundtrack, better character development, and a fantastic story with a wonderful sense of how to tell that tale. For the first time, Halo felt accessible to me, and gave me a reason to care about it over many other sci-fi properties. The most brilliant aspect of the game's plot is the dual focus on Master Chief and the Arbiter. Unlike Halo 5, both protagonists are interesting and relatable, though I think the Arbiter has the edge over the Chief, even while I think Chief's sections are more fun to play. Some of the levels still feel a little copy-pasted at parts, which is a standard problem with Halo as a series, but it's less problematic here because almost no area feels exactly the same given the different combat scenarios and placement of enemies. A more dynamic enemy AI means I'm no longer focusing on the rooms and pacing over the combat itself, and that's wonderful. And the opening act with the UNSC repelling the Covenant on Earth is one of my favorite collections of levels in any video game. Chief returning the bomb, driving a warthog through the tunnels, blasting across the bridge with a tank, and taking down a scarab. So rippin' good. The only real complaint I have is with that hard stop of an ending, but structurally it does make a certain amount of sense to end there. I think it's actually a testament to how good the game is that even after playing a standard length campaign, we felt ready and eager to experience the next chapter immediately. Though I get this was because the production team had to cut parts of the game in order to meet the deadline, hence why half of Halo 3's campaign is essentially covering what would have been the final act to this one. Of course, the campaign is only half the reason Halo caught on, the other half is the multiplayer. My circumstances didn't allow me to experience the game online, but I've spent more than enough time playing split-screen co-op and versus to know that this was a thing of beauty. Most of the maps are great in their own way, the amount of customization in game modes were impressive, and taking the experience online felt so natural. But even without the multiplayer, this game would still be at the top of my list. With the anniversary remake in the Master Chief Collection, Halo 2 still remains as juicy an experience as it ever was, and it's hands down one of my favorite shooters on any system. Halo simply doesn't get much better than Halo 2. I had a great time these last few weeks playing through all 8 of these titles, some of them for the first time in years. I particularly enjoyed seeing the progression of the series, as I naturally started with Combat Evolved and moved through chronologically to Halo Infinite, though I did save ODST and Reach until the end. The series started as an innovative shooter that set the standard for the genre, though a bit lacking in story and character development. That thankfully improved over time, to the point where making films and television shows based on the series was a viable option. Despite this progression, it's the games themselves that remain the star of the show. The original Bungie titles are the most highly regarded, though there are definitely improvements that have been made during 343's time that further capitalized on the core concepts of the series. I still don't think I'll ever be as into Halo as others, but several of the games hold cherished spots in my library, and I'll always be grateful that this series helped pave the way for some of my favorite games to come. Side note, can we all agree that the Grunt Birthday Party skull is the best?